I'm just going to hand over the whole thing to Ashish, who will take over from here. And we have many sort of events planned, many sessions planned through the evening till the final program, which is the screening of Bamboo Flute, and a little discussion around it after the film as well, if you can stay so long. Thank you.
So thanks for that, Veena. And welcome everybody. My name is Ashish Rajadhyaksha. Welcome to an event which we're calling the Kumar Shahani Legacy. This is his 84th birthday, and so we're meeting on this occasion. As you all know, of course, Kumar left us on the 24th of February earlier this year, and it was an occasion, I think, for many people across film studies in India and filmmaking in India. I mean, the number of events that have taken place after he passed away in Kerala, in Bombay, in Delhi, in Calcutta, and in other places, have sort of indicated the extent to which the Indian cinema and a much wider zone of, shall we say, social theory, acknowledged him and mourned his passing. Today is, however, a special day, because amongst us are a number of people who were amongst his closest collaborators, partners, friends. And I think for many of us, it's an occasion to remember Kumar, but also I think an occasion to, some months later now, step back a little and look at the Kumar Shahani legacy. What is actually the what has Kumar Shahani meant? What has he left behind for us? In what manner are we going to individually and collectively come to terms with whatever it is that we have before us? It is a career of something like 60 years. And it is a career that included and centrally involved filmmaking, but as we now discover, it involved something considerably larger than or diverse from filmmaking. There were the films, there were the ideas. There is a lot of material that involves very interesting and complex archival challenges. And then there is the legacy, as we're going to think about it. It is a particularly important occasion that the Film Studies program at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, fully represented here by many, many old friends, and I keep saying partners in crime, yes, are coming together with the Sher-Gil-Sundaram Arts Foundation. The School of Arts and Aesthetics teaches Kumar as part of, mostly I understand, the New Indian Cinema, yes, and I imagine as time goes on, we will actually start thinking about other ways we can teach this. And I imagine that today might be an occasion for many of us to also think together in terms of what the Kumar Shahani legacy might mean as a pedagogic practice. I also want to remember that Bhaskar, who's here with me and who was the dean or whatever the term is, at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, organized a retrospective of Kumar Shahani's films in 2015 on the occasion of the publication of the volume, The Shock of Desire, published by Tulika Books, represented here by Indu Chandrasekhar, without whom nothing of this would have happened. That's as far as the School of Arts and Aesthetics goes. As far as the Sher-Gil-Sundaram Arts Foundation goes, Vivan Sundaram, who you all know set up the foundation, was one of Kumar's oldest collaborators and friends. I mean, Kumar and Vivan go back till when? I don't know, certainly May 68, and the radical student, original partners of crime, they really go back a very, very long way. And of course, being, extremely close friends, collaborators, comrades, they even worked together on what could have been one of his major unfinished films. So it is particularly appropriate that School of Arts and Aesthetics comes together with SSAF to organize this event. To, as I was saying, look at a life and a career and to try and take a first stab maybe at what we make of it, what we can make of the Kumar Shahani legacy. quick introductions. Basically, we are a little bit short on time. We will have 4 presentations, of which Laleen Jayamanne, who is... Laleen, hi, can you hear us?
Yes, yes. Hi.
Okay, Laleen Jayamanne joining us from Sydney, Australia. Author of Kumar Shahani, the epic cinema of Kumar Shahani. She will be in with us. But otherwise, we have Bhaskar, Urmila, Bhirdikar, and Laleen. One interesting development that happened was that the version of Bamboo Flute, which was his last, shall we say, finished film that is in the public domain, his last finished film, Priya Charu Shele, is not yet in the public domain, is a film that we are going to show. And I was fairly convinced that the print was 64 minutes long. Turns out I was wrong. Turns out that the print that we have received last night from the National Film Archive of India is 84 minutes long. This means that, I don't know, Rimli, if you've seen the 84-minute version. It is possible that most of us have never seen the version of the film that we are seeing today. So it's actually something's happening in real time, and this is very, very central to the Kumar Shahani legacy, yes?
Because they made short DVDs.
2 short DVDs, exactly.
For a long time in public.
Yeah, they are the ones that exist, but the point is that the 84-minute version, they truncated it, and that is the version that has survived, and that's the one that we've all had available. And if I'm not mistaken, you have the same version, and that Iyesha, Abbas had actually checked, and we'd been told it was 64 minutes, which is why we put 64 minutes. Anyway, the good news is that it's 84 minutes, and the 20 additional minutes of the film that are going to be probably quite new to many of us. What we make of it, we will do in real time. Oops, sorry. On the left is an image that I actually took of Kumar when he was shooting Tarang. On the right is Kumar when I first met him, which would have been, roughly speaking, around 77 or 78. But this was not the Kumar Shahani who many of us still remember. When Kumar Shahani returns from France, he is clearly a radical figure, in all the trappings of radicalism that defined the 70s. I mean, he was an iconic figure in a way. A man who was clearly personally frail. You always remember the shock of hair, the sharp eyes, and the limp. He had a pronounced limp. A Marxist, it would be said in the whispers of the time. With an intellectual genealogy that had European roots that also spoke to histories of Indian materialism. He had returned from Paris, as Vivan also had just around then, and had all the hallmarks at that time of an active participant in the events of May 68. As a student in IDHEC in Paris, he had, however, chosen to work, already indicating his departure from what you might describe as the language of radicalism that had existed at that time, to work with Robert Bresson, who was not a major figure in the May 68 events. He returned, however, to an India at that time that was still inflamed by Naxalbari, Srikakulam, and indeed the Calcutta of the late 60s. Radicalism was in the air. Time then to clearly make a radical film. This, I want to quickly say, was the Kumar that I knew very well, and these were the people who I saw around me. In the center is Roshan Shahani, who's here, and this was my growing up, my coming of age, yours as well. These were the people whom we saw and looked up to, talked to. What he did do when he came back, however, was to make a radical film that defied any prevailing understanding of radical cinema. Maya Darpan, it was called, a slow saga of a woman whose inner traumas mapped onto the world, a desert landscape from which she would occasionally depart in the fantasies of luxurious green foliage. Ira is going to talk about Maya Darpan as we go. The problem at that time when he made Maya Darpan, and in a way I think continued for a long time, was simply this, that there was simply no context in India for the kind of cinema he stood for. There was no way you could make films of that kind, which meant that not only did he have to find ways to make those films, persuade state agencies to allow him to make those films, but produce, along with the making of the films, an intellectual, creative, aesthetic context within which those films could be seen. Maya Darpan was considered widely to be unreleasable. So it's interesting that Veena actually mentions it in the conversation the other day, is the most accessible film. It was not seen for decades as actually a terribly accessible film. It's interesting how accessible it has now become. The film was, as you all know, widely attacked, as Manikol's work was by Satyajit Ray, who threatened it of rendering film language extinct. It survived, however, and it continued to survive. But the problem that it raised for Kumar Shahani at that time was an interesting one. It was that there was no way he felt of commoditizing the kind of cinema he stood for. Yeah, he was talking about, and I quote him here, positive commoditization. He says, and he talked about at that time something called the epic form, which, along with producing large cultural and political histories associated with, political histories going back in civilizational time, were actually possible to be excavated within the popular. He says, as I viewed it, the epic has always to find its expression through the dominant mode of exchange. I had to place my cinema in the present, in a historical situation where it had to articulate itself with the positive aspects of commodification. I had to realize within such commodification the languages that reveal the material states of oppression as formulated in the ideologies that emerged, and a universe of experience contained by mythology that was equally shaped by those material states. So he wanted to make a film that was of that kind, and what he did was, to make Tarang. It's interesting. I mean, Tarang is a film that we all know. It was believed at that time that it was actually potentially commercially releasable. I have a screenplay in The Shock of Desire where we have a very early version of Tarang in which Rahul is probably Satish and played by Vinod Khanna. And somewhere down the line is Hansa, played by Urmila Tagore. These were clearly people whom he wanted to work with at that time, and he wanted to make a certain film which was epic within the dominant modes of exchange, i.e. a commercially releasable film that could produce that kind of signification. This is, in a way, I think for me, where my film studies is born, this is a note that he had created for himself. It's also there in The Shock of Desire, where he talks about the epic form and the lyric structure and the dramatic structure, and this thing about the verbal, visual, the musical, dance, theatre, cinema. It seems to have been a chart that he created, and I recall that I found that chart on his table somewhere in Shankar Mahal, and I kept it. And I mean, in a sense, I think you can also get the kind of somewhat structuralist interests that he had, familiar then with the French structuralists, but at the same time, I think going back to Eisenstein, possibly mediated through Bakhtin and Brecht. I mean, that was the kind of intellectual context that he had at that time. He made another film that you might say fits into that particular history, Kasbah, which also sort of attempted a form that was, again, the structure of it was to do with accessibility, not within the market definition of it, but within a different historically structured commodification that he was talking about. So that was the film. What happened, however, was that soon after he attempted something rather different. And this is the second stage, and this is a stage that moves away from the 80s, and this is, we're talking about the 90s and the 2000s. Khayal Gatha is where it seems to have begun, where you saw these epic structures as much in classical formations as buried under the dominance of the dramatic lyrical, a form that he said was preferred by the modern bourgeoisie. Forms such as the folk, or even of the proletariat, like the Lavani form that he was interested in. And he made, after Khayal Gatha, two films of Bhavantaran, and the film that we're going to see this evening, Birah, Bharyo, Ghar, Aangan, Kone. we will talk a little bit about these films going forward, but it's a kind of a strange combination of a history of political and cultural materialism, talking to aesthetic practices, mediated by, for example, one of the most important intellectual figures in life, the historian Didi Kosambi, and talking about histories of materialism that made this possible. Laleen Jayamanne, who is with us, will be talking a little bit about performance and the performative idioms. When initially he performed, he acted with sometimes non-actors, but subsequently, this is Pandit Birju Maharaj, completely in full flow with Alagnanda Samarth in a very angular kind of structure. And I should literally like all angles to his sinuousness. Then he made a Char Adhyay. Sorry, this is Bhavantaran. And Bamboo Flute. Bamboo Flute has the dancers Alarmir Valli and Birju Maharaj. This was actually the second sort of body of films, I think, that we might want to look at. And I think this will be discussed sort of later. I'm sure Laleen will be talking a little bit about that as well. Urmila will be talking about Khayal Gatha, mostly from the musical point of view. But I want to kind of conclude my presentation with something that I think many of us, we're talking to Geeth at some length about it, his unfinished films. Now, many filmmakers across the 20th century have had lists of unfinished films, none less than Eisenstein. Orson Welles had all kinds of unfinished films. Kumar Shahani's unfinished films are truly mind-boggling. I want to put them in three categories. There are the incomplete films, that is to say films that were started and not finished, of which I want to talk a little bit about Beyond, the film called A Memoir of the Future on the psychoanalyst Beyond. Films that were developed, that were in stages of development, and I think the collaboration with Vivan, Amrita Sher-Gil was one such. The film that he wanted to make on Anna Karenina, featuring Dimple Kapadia in the role of Anna, was one such. It was close to shooting. And then there are films that he made with in film schools. Var Var Vari is a film that he made as a student workshop. He subsequently made workshop films in both the Film Institute in Pune and in the SRFTI, which included collaborative projects. Unfortunately, those, as far as I can tell, are not been found. This is really interesting and happened like day before yesterday. He made a film in England with acting students. It was called A Ship Aground. This is a film that he made. The title, if I'm not mistaken, refers to Turner, the Turner painting. And this film was produced by Behroz Gandhi with practically no money. And as recently as last week, Behroz Gandhi gave Revati Shahani, who is Kumar's younger daughter, Kumar and Roshan's younger daughter, who is an artist now in England, who actually, along with photography friends, is in the process of digitizing the film. And these are images she sent me like 2 days ago. This relates to the second half of this presentation around the kind of interesting and significant cultural challenges and technical challenges associated with digitization. The Beyond film. This was a film involving a British psychoanalyst, W.R. Beyond, who was a very important figure for a lot of Indian analysts. I mean, he came within the traditions of Klein. And this was a film called A Memoir of the Future, which involved a very strange and extremely interesting autobiography that Beyond wrote called A Memoir of the Future. This particular film, unfinished as it is, there are some sequences that were shot. You have some very interesting people in it. I mean, Nigel Hawthorne, you will all remember from Yes Minister. He actually plays Beyond in the film. But there was Carol Drinkwater, there was Angela Pleasance, a number of British television actors who were actually brought to India to make this particular film. Meg Harris Williams is a psychoanalyst. She's a British psychoanalyst. She's a partner of Don Meltzer, and she has published the screenplay of that particular film just now. And this is the sequence that you have, which is called the sequence of heaven. And I'll just play you a minute of that particular sequence, just to indicate how far we will have departed.
My children.
Sorry. Oops.
Bless you.
I did want to kind of take this a little forward and talk a little bit about this particular film, because it has a number of actors, and this particular sequence was actually shot in Okay, I don't think this is working. The internet is an issue. Yeah, apologies for that. This is presented as a film fragment that Kumar had made and is available. And I will want to mention. Sorry, here we are.
Bless you.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to try and shut this off if I can. Sorry about that. I just shut this.
Yes, cheers, request.
Okay, let me see.
Report.
The Jalal Agha and Alaknanda Samarth and Nigel Hawthorne. Anyway, we'll have to leave it there because time is running out. The screenplay of this film is available, and more interestingly, I think it actually sort of opens up an entire interest that Kumar had in psychoanalysis, which actually appears in several of the essays of The Shock of the Shock of Desire. The self as an objective entity, figures of film and narrativity would be an instance of trying to make sense of a certain kind of Kumar who was very interested in a number of things at this stage. Okay, that's the extent of my PowerPoint. I'll just mention two other films which were of some interest. One was a film. This was interesting. It's actually a very important British producer called Peter Sainsbury, who Kumar had been in conversation with, and there was an effort to try and make a film on Hamlet, featuring. At that time, they were trying to work this out, and this was actually to do with the fact that he had got a little toehold into the London situation, and he then suggested that Michael Jackson could be asked to play Hamlet. Now, quite why he did it, quite how this was going to work out, whether it was an unfinished film to end all unfinished films is a question we don't know. But Peter Sainsbury isn't unfortunately with us anymore, and I want to end this with yet another film just to indicate the kind of. I mean, I'm just opening this up to indicate the kind of range that we were talking about. Roberto Rossellini. Now, Kumar had met Rossellini sometime, I think it was in the early 70s. And Rossellini had, towards the end of his life, made a number of sort of didactic biographical films. So the La Prise du Pouvoir de Louis XIV is one such on Louis XIV. He had, I understand, I didn't know this, made a biographical on Christ. And his very last film was meant to have been a biographical on Karl Marx. Now, it so happens that there is actually a screenplay of Karl Marx, or the biographical film on Karl Marx, that on the early years of Marx, that lay on Rossellini's table when he passed away. There is some question as to whether he wrote it himself or who wrote it, but there was some actual possibility that Kumar might be actually invited to make that film. Nothing came of it, as nothing came of a lot of other films, but it just sort of, I think, opens up the sort of range of the kind of filmmaker we are talking about, and the manner in which we may, going forward, have to frame what might be the Kumar Shahani legacy going forward. So thank you for that, and now it's over to Ira.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you for this overview and this very comprehensive sort of introduction, I'd like to say, about Kumar. As you said, these were our growing years, you know, the 70s, when we met, all of us separately in different locations, interacted with Kumar's work, and Ashish's was one story, mine is another. And I want to actually begin with how I encountered Kumar's work, and particularly Kumar's Maya Darpan. And that's the film I'm going to focus on, because it is connected of course, to my growing up years in college, but it's also connected to a very important intervention of the late 60s and early 70s, which is the Film Society movement. So in the Film Society movement, of course, many film societies had been set up from the late 40s through the 50s, etc. But in the 60s, with the setting up of the Film Finance Corporation, the NFAI, and so on, the movement really sort of gained force. And lots of people were setting up film societies, including LSR, Lady Shriram College, which is where I was studying, where the Film Society was set up in 1977, September 1977. And it was called Project, not with a C, but with a K. And it was the first year, the inaugural year, the first quarter of the inaugural year, which is from September onwards, September 77 onwards. And we were students there, and I was involved with the Film Society. And we had seen some international cinema. We had seen, and we had been quite taken up with the, of course, the neorealist films and all were easy to understand, but we'd also seen René's last year in Marienbad. And that was, you know, that was sort of strange to us. We had begun, the society was set up with, I was involved, but it was the staff members, two staff members, Maria Kuto and Dr. Meenakshi Mukherjee, who were very, very involved in setting this up. And they knew the filmmakers and so on, and they had talked of the new cinema movement. So of course we were excited to see as much as we could. And it was in late November, December of 1977 that we screened Maya Darpan. And it was the 35mm print, which is how we used to see films in those days. And the print was, we acquired it, we received it from the National Film Archive, which was encouraging Film Society work, etc. And so this was it was a big auditorium, the LSR auditorium, where we screened this film on celluloid. And it was, we had seen, now I can't remember whether we saw, I think we must have seen Uski Roti before this, which was equally, you know, sort of significant. But as the opening frames of Maya Darpan began, it took one's breath away, actually. The copy I have is DVD, ECD, DVD, I don't know, transferred. So it doesn't have that same power as that version that we saw. We were 19, 20-year-olds at that time, encountering stunningly different work from the cinema that we had been used to as children. And Maya Darpan, with its fluid tracking shots, its sensuous movement of color, and its intense aesthetic engagement with the properties of film, allured us even as it confounded us then in terms of both meaning and political intervention. We had seen Uski Roti, which is when we had a sense of a very different cinema that was being made at the time. This film was in color, where the play of color was different from the popular cinema we had seen, and clearly had a significance that we didn't fully grasp then, but we sensed that we were in the presence of an Indian cinema that was not only different, but was attempting something very, very significant. So I want to use this clip, the opening of Maya Darpan, just to sort of convey some of what we must have felt then, what I still remember as feeling, that sense of being both amazed and confounded. A clip that every time one has returned to it, the sense of wonder has remained intact. For the young students here, those who haven't seen this film or who have seen it a while ago, I would like to draw their attention to the camera work, the mapping of space, the use of colors, both faded and saturated, the song with its lyrics, and the evocation of a world that we will realize in the course of the film is on the brink of disintegration. So here I'd like to show a bit of the opening of Maya Darpan, and we'd like to have the lights off. Notice the tracks, the textures of the roof and the walls, the colors. Listen to the words, try and understand that. sound which does not match the visual. I only understood this term contrapuntal sound much later. The lullaby to a young boy, a young male child, with a cradle that has a red sheet, a silver cradle with feet of gold. Notice how the image, the camera stops here, almost like creating a still image. Contrast this with the moving camera here, the stains on the wall. Okay, so can you have the lights on? I didn't want to continue to speak, but as you watch this for the first time, there are many, many meanings that unfold, many significances that unfold. And in the course of this opening sequence, which hasn't finished yet, one realizes the world that Kumar is creating, you know, and the solidity of that world. It's an old feudal world, a world which is very firm on its values that involve caste and class positions. And these are meanings that unravel slowly as you encounter the film repeatedly. I mean, I have come to this, you know, I mean, I appreciate the film much more now than I did in that first screening where I didn't understand. I was sort of so focused on what it was showing that I didn't understand everything. It's on repeated viewings and while teaching the film that, you know, these significances have sort of opened up for me. So this moment, and while sort of trying to understand what this moment meant through the film, watching other films of this time, led us, my generation at that time, those who were interested in cinema, to also understand where these films were coming from, how they were being financed, and that led, of course, to the encounter with something called the Film Finance Corporation, FFC. And these were the early films that were financed by the FFC. And if we look at the phenomenal work that was produced between 1969 and 1974, we realized that the FFC had enabled a new cinema movement, what I have called the New Wave, but it's also known as the New Cinema Movement. The manifesto for this movement was written by Mrinal Sen and Arun Kaul, and that manifesto envisaged a tourist cinema that offered the filmmaker freedom to realize his or her vision, untrammeled by all considerations, except creative and aesthetic. So this movement by those who wrote the manifesto was conceived as a self-sufficient structure embracing all the three branches of filmmaking, production, distribution, and exhibition. And it was an articulation of a form of thinking that was shared by many in different parts of India. Central to the concept of the new film was the idea of developing a new kind of audience, one whose participation and involvement would be of the kind that modern art demands. So a new audience who will appreciate a film form that's abstract, that is layered, and that is extremely, if you like, complex in a way. The FFC film then became a node around which a robust thinking about alternative cinema practices cohered. FFC was not the only organization funding these films. There were others as well, and a lot of films that were made during this time were not necessarily financed by the FFC or with the state film development corporations. They were also individually financed, like Samskara was, Kannada film, based on Anantmurthy's novel and many others. This was just the beginning for some of us, a beginning that would lead to intense discoveries about cinematic form, about cinematic art, about poetry, music, dance, and about yearnings of the soul that are inexpressible, fleetingly glimpsed or felt, but which one sensed in the cinema one was introduced to through the work of Kumar Shahani and Mani Kaul. So it was with the continuing engagement with the work of Kumar Shahani that one realized the significance of certain figures for his cinematic development and their work for him. There are many, but I'll just mention, of course, Ritwik Ghatak, who was his teacher, from whom he considered his guru, and Robert Bresson. I mean, I'll make some comments as I go along, but Ashish has already spoken about Bresson and why Bresson was so important for Kumar. Also Chandralekha, the modern dancer choreographer, very important for Kumar's work, particularly for this film. Akbar Padamsi and the vision exchange workshops that he conducted between 1969 and 72. And these are this was information, and this was also the kind of contextualizing that one slowly got to do through various conversations during the late 70s and early 80s, where Delhi was the site of such discussions about art and aesthetics, theatre, music, cultural practices, cinema, and I recall the passionate conversations as a group of people met repeatedly to discuss these and the possibilities of an intervention through a journal. And then finally the launch of the Journal of Arts and Ideas in 1981-82. Kumar was part of that group, as were Gil-Sundaram and Geeta Kapoor, Ashish, Madan Gopal Singh, Romi Chhabra, Kalpana Sahani, Safdar Hashmi, and so many others. And it was this journal and the meetings around the journal, the planning of the issues, where a lot of discussion about what is important for us to study culture and cinema and art and so on. So it was other engagements aesthetically, intellectually and philosophically that formed the context for this work, that one realized a little later through continued involvement with cinema, the work of these two filmmakers, and the numerous conversations in different contexts, Delhi, Pune, Bombay, New York, etc. In fact, it is these and other dialogues and an intense and continued involvement with different film traditions that led to a realization, I'm talking about myself and others who I was interacting with, a realization of radical cinematic practices of a wide range, both international and in our context. What the Journal of Arts and Ideas did, and the Film Society screenings, the intense discussions I'm referring to, is to indicate the context of art historical, literary, performative arts debates of the time within which this cinema was received, as also the realization that films were also located in a context, in these contexts, and debates about art, cultural practices, politics, and cinema that were taking place. It was the matrix of South Asian cultural histories, visual, musical, literary, and dramatic, as well as politics in a post-emergency India, that was so important for the formation of the aesthetic of Kumar and Mani as they continue to make their films. And thus the significance of Amrita Sher-Gil, the Janta murals, the Rajasthani miniature paintings, the Nai Kahani movement, folk and classical musical and dance traditions, radical political theatre, and the post-colonial socio-political reality of India were important for the work that Kumar and Mani produced, but also for the constitution of the Indian New Wave in the late 1960s, forming its distinctive and even radical intervention. What is significant is how all these questions and engagements created a particular kind of cinematic practice in the work of Kumar, one that engaged with both politics and the arts, not through direct imitation, reflection, but through complex, formal, and sensuous articulations. It is over years and through continuous involvement with the films that Kumar was making that one began to really comprehend why cinematic sensuousness, on the one hand, and the minimalism of form on the other was significant for an understanding of what these works meant. So in this context, I mean with this background rather, I'd like to show a few more clips. And you've already seen the opening, of course, not the complete opening, but you've got a sense of it. I want to go to another section of the film, which is known as Taran's monologue. So the woman you saw, who lives in this feudal house, and while she's talking and walking, you see the solidity of the house that represents the world of the feudal elite. So Taran's monologue is her inchoate sensing of a wide open, during that time, wide open space, which she hasn't got to yet, but which is there outside of her, and she yearns for it. She wants to get there. It's a struggle for her. And the non-diegetic insert, and I want to show that, the images of violence sequence as it is known, both cinematic self-reflexivity that shows this, and the opening out of the immediate context of the film into the larger historical context and the violence of 20th century modernity. So this is the clip that
मैं उस पर चलती हूँ, बहरी, गूंगी, कातर, हमेशा आसपास, तख्तकी बांध तकती है, हंसती है, फिर कसती जाती है.
So for those who haven't seen it, it's a small town in Rajasthan getting transformed into an industrial town, which is the immediate. The wandering woman in other New Wave contexts that we've talked about. Well, you have Taran here.
देखा, तुमने देखा, तहका फूल झाड़ी में.
It's important to pay attention to the color scheme. The red sari.
सब कुछ खुला खुला. झड़ती धूल, मैली रात, मैला मेरा देह का सपना. पकड़ो पकड़ो मेरे जंगल में हत्यारा.
It's a long monologue, and you know she's traversing different kind of spaces while she's talking. And you see her in a state of alienation.
मैं पकड़ती हूँ, फिर छोड़ देती हूँ. मैंने उन्हें कई बार सुना है, अंतहीन दिशाओं के झंझनाते सिग्नल, अंधेरे में चमकते हुए, अपने पास बुलाते हुए. लेकिन मैं उनके लिए नहीं हूँ. लौट लौट कर मैं वहीं जाती हूँ जहाँ पहले कभी थी और अब कोई नहीं है.
So different historical contexts evoked here: Second World War, Hiroshima, the Indian independence movement, the violence of that time, and so on. I'll show the next one as well, and then Vietnam, yeah. So this is what we call the Kali sequence, in which and you'll see.
क्यों? आज मैं उस कोठरी में गई थी, तुम्हारी माँ के कमरे में। मैं देर तक उनकी चीजों को उलटती पलटती रही। गहने जेवर तो खैर हैं ही, लेकिन उनके ब्याह की साड़ी भी ज्यों की त्यों रखी है, जैसे अभी अभी पहनकर उतारी हो। उन्हीं दिनों तुम्हारे बाबू नए नए दीवान बने थे। जिस धूमधाम से उनकी शादी हुई, मुझे अब तक याद है। मुसलमानों के दरबार में वही एक हिंदू थे।
बुआ, उस दिन की बात बताओ जब रियासत के रेजिडेंट बाबूजी से मिलने आए थे।
कितनी बार तो बता चुकी हूँ। मैंने पहली बार किसी अंग्रेज को देखा था। आस पड़ोस के सब लोग हमारे घर के सामने जमा हो गए थे। जब तेरे बाबू ने बाहर आकर उनसे हाथ मिलाया तो सब लोग हैरत से उनकी ओर देखते रहे। मैं और तेरी माँ पर्दे के पीछे से उन्हें देखती रही। तेरे बाबू पहले तो उस अंग्रेज के साथ बैठकर खाते पीते रहे, लेकिन जब वह चला गया तब उन्होंने स्नान किया और जिन बर्तनों में साहब ने खाया था उन्हें बाहर फेंकवा दिया।
बुआ, तुम तो हमेशा से बाबू के साथ रही हो, क्या पहले भी तुम उनसे इतना डरती थी?
उन्हीं दिनों का तो डर है जो आज तक चला आता है। तेरी माँ की आंखें ही ऊपर नहीं उठती थीं। जब कभी तेरे बाबू दरबार जाया करते थे, सफेद रेशमी अचकन, चूड़ीदार पायजामा, प्याजी रंग की पगड़ी, एक बार कोई देख लेता तो निगाहें उन्हीं पर जम जाती। कभी कभी मुझे उनकी कोई बात समझ में नहीं आती। तुम्हारा वर भी वो उसी निगाह से ढूंढते हैं जो एक जमाने में वो खुद थे। घर बिरादरी के चक्कर में आजकल कौन पड़ता है, लेकिन उनसे कहे कौन। जब कभी मैं तेरे ब्याह की बात चलाती हूँ, मुंह फेर लेते हैं। सो रही हो?
Right after the sequence, so could have the lights. So her act of transgression, Taran's act of transgression against her world and its feudal caste, class, and patriarchal values. Notice, I hope you notice that the opening song is played again about the male child, right? That's the world she's protesting against, and you have here the evocation of Taran as the Kali figure. And Kali, who herself is a transgressive figure. So mythic material used by Kumar here for social critique, deploying the subversive force of Kali for Taran and her response against her world. So there are various stages through which this is worked out in the film. I have time for one last clip, then I'll go to the ending. Also, I just want to point out that right after this sequence, we see Taran in a white sari going to Montu. Montu is the son, of his mother is a laborer, and through the film there's this constant engagement with Montu. He also works for the engineer, with whom, of course, you'll see in the next clip. She has an encounter. The engineer is talking about and that was the other clip, freedom as a recognition of necessity. Now what's very interesting is that right after the Kali sequence, Taran goes to Montu's house, and they're obviously low caste, and her mother, in their area, there are many women dressed in green, black and red saris. So the red of Taran's sari is picked up in the sequence as the red of Montu's mother's sari, who gets up as soon as Taran comes there, gets up and gives her a glass of water, which Taran drinks. Now once again, this evokes her father throwing away all the utensils and so on, which she drinks. So in little gestures and little acts, you see how she's going against the values of her own world, right? And then, of course, you have the ending of the film where she goes to meet, and you have this absolutely sort of stunning sequence of a chow dance sequence through which so the color scheme works actually. If you watch it through the film and you notice how it's working, there's red, there's of course white, which there's also purple. So the purple that gets picked up from the image of the Kali on the riverside, right? The purple, and then the red again at the end. So red as the color of revolution. Now what is also very interesting is that there is an implication of a transformation that is going to take place. So in a way, Kumar is using a form in which the future is imaged in the present or indicated in the present. And that is done through stylization, of course. It's done through the color. It's also done through the dance and this very stylized and abstract form of. So we'll see the last sequence.
तुम तरन इसे देखो, क्यूबिकल्स, पैसा है या काम?
तुमने उन्हें सुना विशाल क्रेनों को?
कहते हैं हम शतरंज की बाजी हार गए थे। शतरंज की बाजी।
मैं तुम्हारा हाथ सीने पर रख रही हूँ।
There's an evocation here of a painting by Akbar Padamsee, his painting called Lovers from 1952. But there's also a difference in feeling that this sequence evokes. That's quite somber. This is more joyous.
उनके लिए हमने उनका नफा किया, उनके लिए हमने उनका नफा किया, जो मेरा खून था बहादुर, जो मेरा खून था
काला खून,
तरन
काला खून।
Notice how she's being drawn in. Mayurbhanj Chhau, material cultures of the people. a stylized articulation of conflict between two groups of people. Karan is not in this image. And this is, I hadn't mentioned that her brother is in Assam and he's inviting her to come there. And there's a contrast in terms of color. Of course, very faded here, but in terms of the saturated colors earlier and the green of the forest here and the river. And that's how it ends, the film. Do I have, shall I say a few things? Or? Okay, very quickly. Okay, so finally, just to raise a question about the value of Kumar Shahani's cinematic intervention and his legacy. So a lot has changed since in the last 52 years since this film was made. The digital cultures of today have enabled the accessibility of these films of avant-garde international cinemas, and a new digital cinephilia is in place. Also, there are those who've been inspired by the work of Kumar and Mani, among others, and who have gone on to make films of their own. So what is it that we can talk about, and that we will discuss later. What are the issues that that we could raise in terms of the legacy of Kumar, and how did they locate their work in South Asian aesthetic and cultural traditions, which is of course extremely important to understand. Both what the avant-garde could mean in different, important for what the avant-garde could mean in a different historical and cultural context, as well as to actually understand what Aparna Frank has called the radical aesthetic avant-garde that this film practice of the Indian New Wave cinema represented. In the concluding chapter of her dissertation on the subject, Aparna poses a question that, as she says, haunts all histories of avant-garde practice, but how the failure or the success of a Jainist-based avant-garde is to be determined in relation to the principles and ideals that frame its momentum. This is a question that connects this very specific cinematic development of the New Wave to other such practices in different parts of the world, and it's a question that has been addressed so far by Geeta Kapoor, Ashish himself, Aparna and others, but of course could be explored much more with new work on this area. And then of course there are the filmmakers who we can talk about. So I'll leave it there because it's time now, and thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I invite Urmila Bhirdikar to speak? Mostly about the music. That's correct.
I have a presentation that I have written out. I'll read it. I do not have anything to show here. But I have to introduce myself as a non-scholar of films. I am literally a non-scholar of films. It was a challenge that Ratish threw at me, as I don't know why. And then I said yes, because it would be interesting to see something, learn something new, and talk about the music. I mean, I know a little bit of music, but really cinema is not something that I have dealt with at all. So it's a peculiar kind of presentation that I will read out. My point of entry is with the film and the title, Khayal Gatha. The film first. The opening sounds of Raga Shankara, the ancient sounding voice of Pandit Krishnarao Shankar Pandit, the centrality of the Tanpura scene in a museum kind of display, the Bandish Ada Mahadeva, which goes on to pay tribute to the Gunijana, the knowledgeable, for their knowledge of the 7 notes and the 49 categories of Tans, and the Takhallus of Adarang, Firoz Khan, the nephew of Niamat Khan's Darang, known to have been active in the 18th century in the court of the Mughal king Muhammad Shah Rangila. All these are indeed significant for the history of the genre or form khayal in Hindustani music. The opening scene totally promises a story of khayal. However, the second instance of musical sounds are the alapi or the slow development in Rag Yaman Kalyan, played by Ustad Zia Mohiuddin Dagar on Rudra Veena in the style of Dhrupad, in the palace of the king Man Singh Tomar in the late 15th and 16th century. A music student like I, and not the one in the film, wonders if we will be treated to the story of khayal as emerging from Dhrupad. But we soon realize that Khayal Gatha does not tell such a story. The visual and speech action moves between the stories of Man Singh Tomar and Mriganayani, Bash Bahadur and Roopmati, both of them in the 15th and 16th century, with little forays into the narratives of Heer Ranjha, Soni Mahilwal and others. Stories of love, sacrifice, eros, politics and ethics. The musical genre or the form khayal predominantly serves as at the sonic level, accompanying the visuals, but the sounds are not from the era of its emergence. At some point, khayal is replaced by Pandit Birju Maharaj's dance performance and at times by Thumri. Any anticipation of Kathak and Thumri's relation to khayal, again a story told in multifold variations, is absent in the visual narratives that unfold. At the preliminary level, Khayal Gatha perplexes a music student. And yet, it is not as if some association with Khayal are totally absent. For example, the visuals accompanying the rendition of Miya Malhar, towards the end, we see the woman on the screen walking in the rain, thus invoking the old association between raga and the season. But what about the age-old time raga association peculiar to Khayal, the old Samay Raga theory, and its relation to the mood of the time? Excepting the Rag Sarang, which is associated with afternoon, and Bhairavi with early morning, all the other ragas in the film are night ragas. But we cannot say that all the narrative action on screen is set in the night. The words of the Bandish are sometimes related to the visual narrative, sometimes not. The best a student of Khayal can do now, looking at the title of the film, is to think that Khayal Gatha is an invitation to imagination, just as Khayal music is, literally through improvisation. Upaj, we call it. And in my training in Khayal, Upaj is always accompanied by the English word finishing. I'm citing my Dada Guru Pandit Mallikarjun Mansoor here. He always said Upaj or uska finishing. This is his way of describing sequence in the performance of Khayal. I will come back to this idea later. Outside the film, there are commentaries on the film, but importantly, Shahani's thoughts expressed in short essays written in sentences that are aphorisms. I cite Shahani's essay Notes from an Aesthetic of Cinema Sound, in which he arrives at two fundamental points about sound. One, music is perhaps the most highly developed sensate function of human understanding. And two, one can begin to speak of the aesthetics of sound only in relation to music, because it is this that provides the most fundamental expression of the states of being and of acting as a continuously in a continuously impinging disorder. The third fundamental point is about is an elaboration on Bresson's insight that soundtrack invented silence. But as I see, Shahani also goes back to music per se to understand silence as the absence of differentiation. A single note elongated beyond a point without a frequency difference or a reverberation is not noticed as sound. Further, in this essay, Shahani mentions Khayal as the specific genre that produces a peculiar order of differentiation in the form of a continuous scale, and as the higher form of speech music, and as the highest form of speech music continuum. Aligning this thought to physicist astronomer James Jeans, he quotes him there. Jeans conjectures that it is the music of the future, a continuous scale in which every interval can be made perfect. Shahani adds the example of not only Bhairavi, which uses all the 12 notes in the scale, but even a pentatonic rag like Bhoop. Goes without saying that they are speaking of a melodic line unaccompanied by harmony here. There are 2 points here. The continuous scale, which creates intervals and not through not through stress and stress, but through a combination of difference in frequency, volume, and timbre, and through the techniques of glide, meend and suit, and undulation, gamak. As an aside, musicians use interesting ways to initiate this same idea. Mansoor saying swaras have timing in a raga. Kishori Amankar saying all ragas use all notes, you need to know how to use them. The second point is about speech music continuum. Rajadhyaksha writes that this specifically refers to Gwalior Gharana Khayal singing practice and explains with reference to Neela Bhagwat's words about the speciality of Gwalior Gharana practice. The first point is that in Khayal, a triad of raga, that is melody, tal, rhythm, and bandish, usually translated as poetry, but I would like to explain why it is a limited translation in a minute. The second point made by Bhagwat is about the treatment of the triad in Gwalior Gharana, and perhaps, and it pertains to a particular interactive relation the singer has with all the 3 elements. Bhagwat explains this in 3 steps. The notes of a raga wave around the word. The word is to be delivered in complete form, phonetically and semantically, even interpretively if we take the mood of the singer into account. Tal attunes itself on the ongoing raga and the word and thus becomes a theka, that is, as Rajadhyaksha explains, it stops being a mechanical production of the beats keeping time, but becomes a container of some type. This ongoing musical structure, Rajadhyaksha suggests, is the principle of cinematic sequence in Shahani. Shahani too said this, without the explanation as offered by Bhagwat, but yes, he does say that Gwalior Gharana Gaiki is a guiding principle of creating an order, the continuous scale as the mode of production of difference that appears. So Shahani also said this without the explanation as offered by Bhagwat, but yes, he does say that the Gwalior Gharana Gaiki is a guiding principle of creating an order, the continuous scale as the mode of production of difference that appears at the impinging order of impinging disorder or entropy. From a musician's point of view, I want to suggest that there might be more possibilities of understanding the structure of sequence in Shahani's films, especially Khayal Gatha. But I need to clear some ground first. First of all, the realization of tal, that is rhythm, into theka, the particular wave that it creates, if you will, is not primarily in relation to the raga and the words of the bandish. On its own, tal always already is realized in a theka in 2 aspects, in its own linguistic vocabulary and a wave by itself. In other words, theka is the bandish of the tal. It is absolutely true that it may require a further nuance in its relation to the raga, words of a rag bandish, and the mood of the singer. Let's give a quick example. If we take the teen tal and its bandish is da, din, da, din, da. Then I remember a Kumar Gandharv recording where he wanted a particular lilt, which he tells to the tabla player. He says, play na na dit nin 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 na na. No, he's doing something else which is specific to his particular mood. So the theka then, this is what Bhagwat also means. This is what the theka is really. Secondly, if we think of the theka as the bandish of the tal, naturally the word bandish cannot be limited to the meaningful words of the lyrics. Nonsense words like saregama arrange themselves in a bandish called sargam geet, while a tarana may have other kinds of nonsense words like tanana, dere, tadani, tundredani, etc. Gwalior Gharana especially prides itself for nurturing these bandishes and the variations, Travat, Chaturang, Khayal Numa, etc. These kinds of bandishes decenter the question of specific emotion that may be implied in understanding the relation of the singer and the words of the bandish. Shahani does note the poverty of the words of the bandish and emphasize the mood. Thirdly, as Bhagwat writes, singing khayal is the act of recreating the bandish. But again, This does not happen without some idea of progression in khayal. The progression is that of speed, and that action may leave, and in that action, words may be left behind, especially in singing tans, using various vowels. True, Gwalior Gharana singers stay with the consonants even in the increased speed, or in other words, they use much more of the bol alap or the bol tan, but it is not as if they do it all the time. As an ardent listener of many singers of that particular gharana, I'm amazed at the pure tan and the strength of the pure abstract intellectual treatment they award to the rag, sometimes at the cost of even mood, leading to pure affect in which the surface of the listener's body is the predominant receptor of the music. Fourth and the last, I would like to bring back Mallikarjun Mansoor's idea of improvisation, upaj or uska finishing, as the fundamental principle of sequence in khayal singing. This idea emphasizes the significance of the theka as a rhythmic cycle. Upaj, literally birth, refers to initiating a design idea through the combination of notes, which is to be developed, again, Mansoor's word, and finishing means bringing the design to end in order to reach the sum and the first beat of the theka. By singing the mukhada, literally the face of the bandish, part of the bandish. I'm surprised Bhagwat does not bring out their significance enough in her piece, but emphasizing the cyclical structure of the avartan and the progression of speeds allows to capture an internal episodic, I have put a question mark here, structure to the musical form khayal. The progression is not strictly linear, it seems. Famously, Mansoor varied speeds at the consternation of his purest listeners. Having said all of this, I wonder if it provides a useful way of understanding the film Khayal Gatha. The film is not about khayal. It is about that complex theme of love, longing, eros, politics, ethics. The stories of the lovers are told in varying speeds, but gathering more speed towards the end, if I may be so bold to suggest. Khayal Gatha does not tell the story of khayal as emerging from Drupad. Let us remember that the first instance of Drupad playing occurs as belonging to Mansingh Tomar's court. Zia Mohyuddin Dagar has played the Rudraveena in character. The dance and the tumris in Rag, Kafi and Bhairavi are not related to khayal in a historical way. They are musical expressions or bodily expressions of a particular ragas that express the mood of that particular scene. The music student, this time the character in the film, the music student's quest about his birth and music, say Indian music, will continue and reach the urban centers in colonial India on a fast-speeding train, thus culminating a khayal rendition. All of this is accompanied by various bandishes in khayal, sometimes within the various customary associations, sometimes not, as I said in the beginning, and so in my reading also drawing attention to itself in a self-reflexive mode. This suggests that the historical question of khayal might still remain. This leads me to my very short second part. I refer to Rajadhyaksha's introduction here as he frames the problem within the juxtaposition of history and myth, of telling the history from a specific here and now, of the place of the myth in modernism, and modernism producing its reified object of art. To name a few smaller frames placed within the larger frame of the claims of modernity, counter-modernity and global cinema. Within this film, Rajadhyaksha says, the question of history appears as a riddle for the little prince to find out about, but the film does not solve it. Rather, the film produces khayal as the aesthetic practice that addresses the here and now of history. As a consequence, quote, it debars khayal from being seen as a modernist practice. It clearly is, making it the par excellence example of a fallen art for an Indian modernism. Rajadhyaksha delineates modernism of khayal with reference to parallel development of other modernist aesthetic practices such as Ravi Verma's paintings or Premchand's novels, or in general the nationalist frame of their development. We could add khayal itself, as reproduced through the recording technology, the inclusion of harmonium and the tempered scale within which it within which it is practiced, the replacement of an older theory of Shruti or microtones for creating the idea of a continuous scale. For me, however, the problem leads elsewhere. I state it as the problem of the production of modern India's classical arts as not through the classical and folk as given categories, but as produced through the processes of classicization of Indian modernity and through modernization itself. The specific problem can be stated better with reference to Bhavantaran, which makes the relation between dance and sculpture, marks the relation between dance and sculpture sharply. I cite Adya Kaktikar's work, where she documents the collective effort of combining Sanskrit Shastra and the temple sculpture together through the technology of photography, together for the production of Odissi, much like or rather directly inspired by the classicization of Bharatnatyam in Kalakshetra, and in the case of Odissi, making Gotipua its folk art. The debates about these, framed within the question of ownership and appropriation, are well known. This further delineation with reference to the opposition between aesthetic and its other, I'm quoting her very quickly the way in which Shailaja Paik recently has treated the vulgarity of caste, will still remain a problem for me to address, especially with reference to cinema. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much, Urmila. That was really, really important and interesting. We will move to Laleen Jayamanne now. Laleen Jayamanne is joining us from Sydney in Australia, and I mean she's a film studies person. She's also a filmmaker, and she has this book on Kumar, which we've actually I think only now started to really kind of understand. It's called The Epic Cinema of Kumar Shahani. Laleen, can you hear us?
Yes, yes.
Okay, Laleen, it's all yours. What you do is that just whenever you want to show the slide, just tell me and I'll play that slide. So you have 20 minutes.
Yeah. I want to thank JNU for inviting me to this amazing event, and also thank my friend Geetha, my mentor also and friend, and Ashish for helping me to formulate this talk, and Rimli for sustaining me in the past months after Kumar died, and after my husband also died, and just before the birth of my first grandchild. So I've been suspended between death and a birth. My paper is called The Embryogenesis of the Shahani Actor, Becoming Dancer, Becoming Icon, and. Let me start with an anecdote, as we tend to do in Australia, where, by the way, I have lived and worked for nearly 50 years, teaching cinema for about 30 of those years, but was born and raised in a Ceylon very far away from India. Therefore, I'm very grateful to Australia for enabling my engagement with Kumar's cinema and so with India, belatedly from the Gadigal country of the Eora nation. Let us remember with gratitude that the Australian Cinematheque at Goma in Queensland Art Gallery has archived 3 of Kumar's films, including Hayalgata. The curators swiftly intervened and struck a dupe negative from a clean print when the original was decaying in a lab in India. Here's my anecdote. Charlie Chaplin had dinner with Brecht's long-term collaborator Hans Eisler after the premiere of Bertolt Brecht's The Life of Galileo in 1947 in LA, 2 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Chaplin told Eisler that he would have liked a bit more drama and that Brecht could have mounted it differently. To which Eisler, who had worked with Brecht in Weimar, Germany, replied, Brecht never wanted to mount things. What disappointed Chaplin, along with major US theatre critics, was the absence of the typical dramatic conflict in Brecht's play about the betrayal of scientific reason at the very moment of the birth of modern physics in 1633. Galileo Galilei was played by the British actor Charles Laughton, who Brecht thought was an admirable epic actor, a rare creature. Epic acting was a new mode of performance that Brecht formulated, thought to be necessary for an audience in the nuclear age facing Nazism with its appeal to ecstatic emotion above all. The dramatic mode, which Brecht called Aristotelian, was trenchantly critiqued by him for stirring up emotions alone at the expense of reason and thought. Hence his turn to an epic mode derived from Asian theatrical prototypes. Chaplin is he who comes walking, as the donor said in his essay written as a birthday gift to Chaplin. He's the one who comes walking into film and film history in 1940. His iconicity based on his silhouette and his walk. Shahani gave a memorable lecture to my silent to sound cinema class in 2003 on American silent cinema, and he asked me to get clips of the burlesque tradition, that is to say the slapstick tradition culminated in the work of Chaplin and Keaton. Shahani's actors walk. He's always walking and walking, say many Indians I know. Sure, they walk a lot, but in variegated ways. Walking is a grounding, primal movement and gesture of his actor, who walks in an epic rather than a dramatic mise-en-scène. An epic territory, that is to say, a space that is multi-perspectival, where time doesn't move chronologically, but opens onto duration, a virtuality in the image, which is linked to Bergson's idea of virtuality and duration, which Kumar loved. And Bergson was engaged with Indian metaphysics. Dramatic spatiotemporal structure consists of actions and reactions, as you know, within the three unities of time, place, and action: causality, empathy, identification with familiar emotions. Darwin's 7 or 8 universal emotions are what's active here. The sensory motor logic of actions and reactions control our nervous system, is a condition of its operation. It is a sensory motor system evolved over millennia, and it's that which makes me speak to you today and for you to sit there quietly listening to me. It's a sensory motor operation. Let me create a context. We want to think of Kumar's work as Eurasian, that as Kumar as having a Eurasian imaginary. Now I get this idea of a Eurasian practice from the great theatre director and theorist Eugenio Barba. In the book on theatre anthropology, The Secret Art of the Performer, that he wrote with Nicola Savaresi, Italian theatre historian. They said they were not going to talk about the West and the East, but rather Eurasian theatre, assuming this huge landmass where immense traffic of people, trade of ideas, religions have happened. A two-way street, shall we say. In this, and we want to think of Kumar's oeuvre and work for the future and in this our Asian century, which you see is a multipolar world, with the BRICS countries creating multilateral dialogues, exchanges, trade, rather than unipolar world under US hegemony and ceaseless wars. You'll be wondering why I brought in Barba here, Eugenio Barba here. It's because of Yogisi dancer Sanjukta Panigrahi, the star pupil of Guru Kirtan and Mahapatra. Ashish, I can have the first still of Panigrahi. You think it's from Bhavantaran, but she also appears in Bamboo Flute. Okay?
Yeah.
While writing my book on Kumar's epic cinema, I was trying to get some rudimentary knowledge of the Indian system of Mudra used in dance. An Italian-Australian student directed me to Barba and Savaresi's profoundly influential book, which has been translated into numerous languages and many editions. Now, instead of looking at the chapter on diagram, on the mudra, I just flicked through the book because it's beautifully illustrated. And I saw an enchanting little girl of about 6 in this same posture as the mature adult panigrahi. It happened to be Chandrika Panigrahi as a 6-year-old girl. 2 images of her. I nearly fell off the chair to find panigrahi in this book on theatre anthropology. I read the caption and the entry on her in the dictionary and could not believe my luck that I knew how I might, that now I felt I knew how I might approach these 2 films, which are a challenge to any cinema studies academic trained in the Anglo-American tradition of the last 40 or so years. From this random opening, I learned about the profound collaboration Sanjit and Barbara had over an intense but truncated time they had together before her untimely death. I learned from another student of mine who works with Barbara that there is a small monument, a cairn it's called, to her memory in Holstebro, Denmark, the home of Barbara's Odeon Theatre. It's made of stones sent by performers who worked with her or saw her perform with Barbara's group. And there's a wonderful interview as well with her, done by one of the Odeon Theatre actors. It's worth reading. You can see the stage is set in that image with little stones. And you can see that her posture has the solidity of stone sculpture, completely alive in its rootedness, seeming rootedness on here. I'll come back to Baba and his link to Mayhold, the Soviet avant-garde director, to touch on his idea of an actor's second nervous system. Here there are deep links among the actor, dancer, and thinker too, all interconnected by an idea of rhythm. And I will read a wonderful passage from Mayhold, which is like a rune, a sort of a puzzle that you can never quite solve, and that's the point of it. It's like an impulse, a stimulus for thought to get derailed in a sense from the kind of railway track on which cinema studies has driven us crazy. Where does the human body, possessing the suppleness of expression demanded by the stage, attain its highest development? In the dance. Because the dance is the movement of the human body in the sphere of rhythm. The dance is to the body what music is to thought, form artificially and yet instinctively created. I think we know that dance is rhythmic. If not, it's nothing. It's not dance. But music is to thought. Do we hear music? Do we feel music, a sense of rhythm when we think and write about cinema? I'm not sure if I do. And the emphasis on artifice, extreme artifice, pruned, developed through years and years of training, yet instinctively produced. So you will hear terms like instinct, impulse, which come from my interest in psychoanalysis and also links with some of Kumar's interest in psychoanalysis. Kumar, this is another context. First was that Baba context. Kumar once told me that the Greeks don't belong to the West alone. And I've just read this marvelous book on Ashoka called Ashoka, Portrait of a Philosopher King by Patrick Olivelle, Indian Life series edited by Ramchandra Guha, which shows what a cosmopolitan court Chandragupta, his grandfather, created, creating exchanges with the Hellenistic kingdoms of the northwest of India, that is to say, Pakistan and Afghanistan area, which is Greek, thanks to Alexander's invasion. And then, of course, the Gandhara sculpture influenced by Roman, Greco-Roman architecture, sculpture. India's Buddhist art was important for Kumar in its understanding of the relationship of humans to nature and its ideas on compassion as well. In my book, Epic Cinema, I placed Kumar, this is another context, within an internationalist fraternity of filmmakers who from the 60s on forged a variety of epic idioms in order to make films in their respective countries under difficult material conditions. Pasolini, Glavarosha, Ghar, Yansho, Angelopoulos, Tarkovsky, Paladianov, Godard, or Histoire du Cinema, etc. And of course, Eisenstein, always a major guru for Kumar, who visited his museum, his library museum. Kumar Shahani's significant theoretical texts on cinema and on philosophical aesthetics as it pertains to cinema and human perception and thought are also tremendously important. As Godard put it so well in his Histoire du Cinema, film is a form that thinks, and this is true for each of these epic filmmakers. Film is a form that thinks. One of the striking aspects of Kumar Shahani's epic idiom is his actor, and I was asked to talk about Kumar's actor. But I can't do that without talking about the shot and the sequence, because these are the epic actor, non-actor, dancer are creatures of that milieu, from which, the epic milieu from which Kumar creates a territory. So embryogenesis of the Shahani shot, sequence, and actor, non-actor, dancer. I want to approach the walking in Kumar's films from several points of view, but most especially from an evolutionary perspective now. But let's not forget that Kumar had polio and that he was aware of what a precarious act walking was, especially when I walked with him in Mumbai. I was always so scared because the sidewalks are not smooth like they are in Western countries like Sydney, cities like Sydney. So his investment in walking is multifaceted. The rich sources from India I've talked about briefly in my book, so I won't repeat it. But what I will spend quite a bit of time talking about is its prehistory in human evolution. Partly because this is the work I've been reading lately, thinking and writing with, and also planning a sort of collective project with Rimli, and hopefully with Sumati from Sri Lanka and Paul from Australia, who has an approach to cinema which is philological and deeply informed by music, the Western tradition. So I'm going to talk about walking from evidence from prehistory, that is to say, from paleontology, that is the fossil record and bones and cave markings, paintings. This I'm calling a paleo-anthropological approach to think about the figures who walk across Kumar's films. Drawing on prehistory, that is the history of the Neolithic era, lithic is stone, New Stone Age era with tools made of stone, microliths, which D.D. Kosambi studied extensively and taught Kumar to recognize and understand their function in human evolution of culture.
Laleen, do you want me to move the slides?
No, just keep that for the time being.
So the padigrahi.
What was...
I'm showing the Sanjukta padigrahi.
Yeah, you can show the stone as well.
Okay.
Keep it at the stone. The second one.
Yeah, we showing the stone.
One of the striking aspects of Kumar Shahani's epic idiom, D.D. Kosambi studied extensively and taught Kumar when he was a student at FTI. The ones buried quite close to the surface of the soil in Pune, Kumar told me. This paleo-anthropological approach is a new entry point for me in thinking about how Kumar creates his epic persona. I remember Kumar saying once with a touch of exasperation that there are no characters in my films. Character is an idea popularized by late 19th century realist drama, with its well-made play, linear cause-effect dramatic plot structure, and character motivation, etc., which led to realist modes of acting, which are not only a mere 100 or so years old in the history of theatre, which is millennial and global. It is this absence of character that enraged the master filmmaker Satyajit Ray on seeing Mayadarpan, to impel him to write a damning review of a young filmmaker's first film, thus preventing Kumar from getting funded for a film for the next 10 years. Ray, who drew such luminous naturalist acting from his actors in Patra Panchali, would never have criticized Brecht's epic conception of character, of say Mother Courage, just because she's not like a character in say, a Chekhov or Ibsen play. However, when it comes to film, there is a rigid idea of what is good cinema, good acting, even in the mind of a sophisticated filmmaker such as Ray. But with each blow the young Shahani received, he appears to have strengthened his, what I'm calling, using the German word from Elois Riegel, Kunstwollen, will to art, will as force, a kind of Nietzschean will to find his own path, neither Margiya nor Desiya, as Kumar Shahani would have it.
It is giving you a 20-minute alert.
Oh, really? Okay, it's already 20 minutes?
Almost.
Okay, then I'll finish up.
Sorry? Okay. Go on, go on.
And I have the big toe.
Okay.
We'll finish with the big toe, I think. Sound of, with this you have sound of metal on stone in bamboo flute, and also the very first sound in Mayadarpan before any image, as the credits roll over a moving stained surface, is, I think, a metal tool hitting stone, thus evoking at once a human arm and fist transposed into an ancient tool, a hammer. It's only after that that we hear the machinic modern technology. In Mayadarpan, Taran's hands and feet are often foregrounded in an everyday kind of way, washed, and at a remarkable moment one toe hooks on to another and are withdrawn from vision under Taran's sari. This gesture appears to express something, but what? This gesture is hard to calibrate on a familiar emotional register. It is no doubt a singular sign at a traumatic moment. Shahani's semiotic impulse, non-linguistic in origin and balance, is rather more like C.S. Peirce's idea of the sign, which is simply an appearance, a phaneron, an appearance. And in Deleuze's Cinema 1, he elaborates on this through the formulation of the affection image, the image in close-up, which derails recognition and therefore cognition. A phaneron for phaneroscopy for Peirce is an appearance before cognition, before we can digest it. It is simply a felt quality which is new, hence it resists conceptualization, but despite this, we, meaning in the academy, must try to testify to it. What do the prehensile hand with the opposable thumb and the big toe have to do with the unique and exalted human ability to think? These two vital anatomical features of our body, the thumb and the big toe, don't draw attention too much. But in Kumar's Mayadarpan, there's constant foregrounding of Taran's feet, not in a fetishistic way, but in an everyday way of washing them. Now, Leroy Guron, very quickly, he says, the human hand is not fundamentally different from that of the primates. Its ability to grasp like theirs is due to the opposable thumb. The foot, however, is radically different from monkeys. And he goes on to show us how, through images, that the foot with the big toe was fundamental to our ability to stand and release the hand from locomotion up on trees so that it began to be able to make tools. And what drove human evolution for him is not the brain, but it's the upright posture, the skeletal restructuring, and the freed hand which moved to make tools. And the making of the tools enabled the making of marks on caves, and making marks with tools, whether stone or later metal, created sound, rhythmic sounds. And it's argued that the development of the mouth, the tongue, and the larynx is linked to our ability to speak and create sequences through this experience of tool making or drawing that's rhythmic. I think I have to stop there.
Would you like to show the remaining 2 slides and speak briefly about them?
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
let's see the hunters from Hariharan, and then and then the last image. With the hunters, there's evocation of the forest and the realm of myth and legend, and when we moved to Jayamanne Singh's palace, we moved into history and politics as intrigue and war. But what I want to say is that the way that Jayamanne Singh's palace is constructed, stone palace, is as an embryonic space. There's a constant sound of liquid, and the sequences operate on a principle of glissando, or gliding across different territories, which invokes the shot as a cell. This is Eisenstein. The intercellular dynamism is so delicate that apparently when cellular biology developed through the microscope's existence, they couldn't study the intradynamics of the cell until the cell was colored with dye, so that the thresholds that were crossed within the cell were perceptible only with color. Now I think Kumar and Eisenstein are one in thinking of this kind of dynamism, this dynamism of intracellular activity, which Deleuze says is in some sense a drama of thinking, but thinking there, a constituted subject would find it hard to operate there, so he's posing something called a larval subject. And I would suggest that actors in Shahani's cinema, some of the privileged actors, are called, as it were, and they have to operate on this principle. And let's just leave it with Smita Patil's performance, where she said that during the hiatus in the direction of Tarang, she had to go back to the Bombay melodramatic cinema, which was some bread and butter, and that it was very hard to come back to working with Kumar, because you have to cross thresholds which we might miss, because Kumar's aesthetic never announces anything. It happens if you blink, some of the most significant crossings and movements are missed. And if she becomes an icon, the icon is never a terminus or achieved point, but it is an emergence, as is actor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laleen. Thank you. The second session today, we are titled Archival Questions. Some of the issues about how to archive somebody's work, somebody's life and work, has already come up in some of the things that's already been spoken. Ashish already mentioned the thing about the film print, which we yesterday evening discovered is longer than we actually thought. Already asking questions about how do we decide what is the object to be archived. That already comes into the picture. So the institutional question of archiving is already on the table in terms of asking what is the object to be archived, how do we archive it, and how do we even think about the truncated kind of object as a real object too, because it's truncated via material practices in a certain sense at some point when a DVD is produced or something like that, right? So how do we actually think about these various formats, various versions of the text, and how do we think about it? It brings up the question about the way in which institution like the National Film Archives will have to imagine the archiving of objects, which brings up the question of national cinema and how most of the time filmmakers, including Kumar Shahani, is thought of within a national cinema imaginary, right? So that would be, I mean, one can say that National Film Archives and institutions like that will still function or will have to function within that framework. But that leads to a second question that also again came up with Ashish's thing, which is about pedagogy, because Indian cinema pedagogy has also followed a national cinema kind of framework for most of its kind of practice. So how do we reimagine filmmakers outside the national cinema framework would be another question about archiving itself.
which will be syllabi, and how do we actually link a filmmaker with another filmmaker, another practice? How do we reimagine that becomes another question. A third way in which archiving becomes an issue would be about thinking about the filmmaker as an individual, as a person making art in the world, a person who lived in this world in a certain sense, and how do you archive a person's life, right, and work. So that's a third kind of way in which archiving becomes an issue. And a fourth one is actually to actually mine a certain kind of filmmaking practices after that follows from that filmmaker, to actually think how does aesthetic practices, formal imaginations continue or are picked up by later filmmakers, transformed into something, and create some kind of a lineage via filmmaking practice, image making practice itself. So there are various ways in which the question of archiving, and that's also an archiving question. How do you actually think about, say, a later filmmaker picking up a certain kind of imagination and doing something with it, and how do we link up with that and create some kind of imagination together? So there are these various ways in which archiving can be thought about, some of which we will discuss today, some of which will have to be thought of as we get on. The pedagogy question, I think, is something that an institution like ours sitting here will have to take very seriously and actually ask, how do you think about a syllabus around a filmmaker at this point of time if you want to actually think outside the national cinema framework? What would that be? The filmmaking question, I think we'll need a different kind of institutional discussion with different set of people involved to actually think about how the kind of lineage of the image actually can be thought of. That again might not be something that we'll be able to discuss today. But two other aspects, the other two aspects is something that we can actually discuss today, and we have two people to actually discuss this. We have two speakers. I will introduce them quickly at the beginning, and then we'll go one after the other. The first speaker today is Iyesha Geeth Abbas. Iyesha has been engaged in research work in audiovisual archives since 2009. Previously, she's worked with the Mumbai-based studio Camp, and has also been part of an extensive silent cinema research project with historian Veerchandaramasivai. It's interesting that I first, some of these accidents make complete sense. The first time I met Iyesha was, I ran into her in films division. Where else? About 10, 12 years ago, right? So she currently works in National Film Archive of India in Pune, and is very central to the preservation and archiving of Indian cinema, and also some kind of an expert on early Indian cinema. So students here, if you want to know about early Indian cinema, Iyesha is the person to contact. The other speaker we have today is Rimli Bhattacharya, who is an author, translator, and archivist. She was a script consultant and production coordinator in Kumar Shahani's Jayamanne, and has also translated the novel from Bengali to English later. She has worked in various fields and has written, writing is quite extensive. Her latest work, which I should mention, latest book that's come out this year, last year. No, 2 years ago. Yeah, the dancing poet Rabindranath Tagore and the choreographies of participation. Yeah, so I'll ask Iyesha to speak first, and then we will go to Rimli. Yeah, Iyesha, one second.
Yeah.
Can we get these lights? Only those two lights. Yeah.
I'll be speeding through this presentation because I have a lot of slides. But thank you very much, Rimli and Ashish, for asking me to be a part of this. My entry point today into the films of Kumar Shahani will be through two entities that have lived through many near-death experiences. One is the National Film Archive of India, and the other one is the analog film. Both of these entities with which Kumar Shahani has interacted with in anguish, great hope. The objects that I'll be showing in this presentation are mainly film frames from the archives collection, some ads, magazine ads, few ephemera here and there. But I would like to add a disclaimer that much of my work in the archives is mainly with paper material research. I'm not trained in the workings of the analog film. What I'm going to be presenting today is a kind of working knowledge, having worked with a lot of reels in the recent past. So I thought we would begin with a film of the frames of which I've not added in this presentation, but which would have really been nice to add here. Also because if you look at the collection, this is an Excel sheet of the catalog. One thing that I must mention is that I have kind of structured this presentation into parts that sort of mirror the main functions of a film archive: acquisition or production, preservation, and then access. And here what I'm showing is the catalog. It's something that we have been...
Sorry.
Share screen for Laleen, because she has she's finished the presentation.
Okay. The catalog, I'm sharing this bit precisely because it is a point of great anxiety for a lot of us working in institutions that have long histories. In the case of the National Film Archive of India, a catalog is something that we have all been working towards, yearning for. Ashish knows about it. Here, another reason I've added this frame is because if you look at the collection of Kumar Shahani's films in the National Film Archive of India, almost all of them have been deposited by either film labs or the Ministry of INB or NFDC, state agencies that have produced Kumar's films. The only film that was donated to the archive by Kumar Shahani himself was this Object in Search of Self, a 16mm print made in Kodachrome. And like the half-eaten catalog that we have to grapple with on a daily basis, the director's name given here is Tamarind Productions. But, you know, we find out it is a Kumar Shahani film when you come across other sources, in this case an interview with Laleen, I believe. The next, we move on to 1972, which is the year Maya Darpan gets certification. It's a year where color films, a record number of color films, as this article from Film Industry says. Prithviraj Kapoor has just died that year too. And this is very important because the kind of rigor and sort of the precision with which Kumar Shahani was working with on analog cinema needs to be documented, has been criminally under-documented really. Here you have a news on, this is an interesting time, right? 1972, you have the government asking for a nationalization of cinemas. You have a very interesting space with the FFC headed by B.K. Karanjia. This ad is from Film Industry, but this is I'll show you something else. This is from a 1973 January issue of Filmfare. The cover is of Rekha, but there is an insane amount of material on the new wave directors, because Karanjia himself has some the sort of need, the desire to stake claim, stake a kind of ownership to these filmmakers by these agencies. So you have housefuls for The Untouchables, because immediately after the film is given certification and released, you have FFC film festivals happening both in Delhi and in London, and KK Mahajan gets the Filmfare Award for Best Cinematographer. You have these lovely pieces on, even, for example, recently Badnaam Basti. The amount of material you are getting from these kind of magazines and industry papers. So this sort of very sweet mingling of forces happening there, you know. And to go back to the Eastman story, I'll be showing you some frames from his films, and here you have an ad for Eastman. Now you have to remember that there's a quota system in place here for film stock. There is something that Kumar Shahani, a very interesting article written by Subarnavel Ishwaran on this sort of this middleman who is getting film Kodak Eastman stock for the new wave guys, especially Kumar Shahani and Manikal, because for Eastman stock you had to pay in dollars, and you had to sign something which was called the Export Replenishment Guarantee, right? And through somebody he knew at Film Center, he gets Eastman stock, and this is very important because he insisted on wanting the Eastman negative stock for negative, remember that, because he wanted the negative stock because of the stability of dyes that it was the stock provided. And here you have another ad for Eastman film. You have, see, plus a lot of foreign exchange, it says there. And then you have Orvo, which was a bit cheaper, produced by the GDR. And then you have Indu, India's own Indu, which you could buy in rupees, but only black and white stock. But they were repackaging Orvo stock for color purposes, people who wanted to make color films on Indu stock. Now we come to, this is the Eastman stock. This is the last scene from Maya Darpan, that great burst of green color that you see here. It's obviously on Eastman camera negative. Here you have that gorgeous, the chow dance sequence. You can see the green, which is for red, and the white, which is for black. And here you have Eastman, from the Eastman negative, you have the film printed on Indu stock, another interest. So in a sense, looking at these frames is also looking at a sort of history of a very important commodity of the time, right? And an important commodity that also necessitated in many ways the mingling of so many different worlds in the cinema space. And here you have again scenes from Maya Darpan, Eastman stock. You can see the print through. What you see on the side is the print through. So it's sort of like the vestiges of its origin is always there on whatever print it moves to. And here you have the dance sequence. It's, one thing I must tell, that these are all taken from my phone camera, and it is really like photographing the moon because analog color, as anyone, Ira also was talking about watching film on analog is another experience. This is not a sort of bring back analog in any sense, but to understand the way Kumar Shahani spoke about films is also a sort of, that the great respect and honoring of chemicals and dyes, really, and light. And here you have, this is very beautiful, the way it moves, frame by frame. Here you have only the percussion, the image has disappeared. Here you have a processing cue, again the image is not there, but you have the percussion there, making a presence in the soundtrack. Now we move on to Eastman. Also, there was the notorious Kodak Red scare, right? So while the camera negative was greatly desired by filmmakers, the release print, the magenta used to stay, while the cyan and the yellows would fade very fast. So what you were left with then was this very strange faded image, and it was uniform throughout. The magenta would stick throughout. It's very interesting actually what I'm seeing right now on this computer. The colors are so different from what I'm seeing there also. There you go. Here you have again, it's the same sequence but with the Kodak scare they called it. And here you have, again you can see the Eastman print through. The birth in that sense is always reference. You can see the print through there. And then again I'm just going to go through a few other frames from Kumar Shahani's other films. Here this is Bhavantarana, again to show you the different kinds of stocks he's working with. This Agfa gave out stock, beautiful images. Here again to give you a sense of how stock matters in the representation of colors. You can see Indu, and you can see this is something that I'm working on right now. It says AVM, but that's an Eastman print through right there. I have to get more details about the other stock. Here you've got that Laleen also just showed some images of the rock from Bamboo Flute. Here you have, again, you get a sense of the way in which the technology of the medium is moving. Here it's polyester from Bamboo Flute. And now to move on to challenges in the preservation of celluloid or the analog film. Here you have the dye the emulsion sort of cracking and you have some dye showing. And here you have that great glorious scene of the Urvashi Pururavas last sequence from Tarang. You can see acid rain. You can imagine this as it's being projected, you would just see the green lines. Oh.
Yes. Does anyone want to
Oh. Oh. We were mute. So to go back to another sort of symptom of aging film in that sense is this acid rain you see on this the spectacular last scene of Tarang, and then oh, I can't seem to move ahead. Yeah, I'll just let it rest for a couple of seconds. While we are on Tarang, the Eastman camera negative stock that I was talking about, besides Maya Darpan, there was also Tarang that Kumar Shahani shot on Eastman camera negative. Also, it was on CinemaScope. So, just even as an artifact in that sense, the camera negative frames are quite strange to look at compared to the other frames because it's sort of compressed. Here you see, so a filter sort of opens it out for the viewer to see, and here you get, you know, the signs of a well-lived, well-watched film in that sense. Here you've got projection splices, again from Tarang, and this is quite amazing to see in the archive. You see a lot of films with these projection splices, and it's a bittersweet moment because you know you don't want, I mean, maybe it's time to stop screening them, but it's also so beautiful, yeah. Here you have got, this is, you might have, when you're watching a film, you might have, there are these flash frames of something that indicates that the next reel is going to take over. And you encounter these sort of markings to give a sort of cue to the projectionist that it's time to, you know, move on to the next reel. Here, this is another eccentricity of analog film in that sense. The LAD, which was a sort of density, a sort of parameter that would indicate to film processing labs about the target density that a film stock could achieve. Here, it's in recent times a lot of interesting research is being done on it. Precisely because of it used to be called China Ladies. This, if you can see, this is an Eastman stock LAD, and here, interestingly, in this print of Bhavantarana, you have Dimple Kapadia's flash frame following the Eastman LAD. Maybe, so I was talking to Piyush about it. He was like, maybe it's for the Indian tone, you know, the skin tone. And it's very interesting. Ashish had just mentioned that Dimple Kapadia was being for Anna Karmina. So that's quite a nice serendipitous find there. Then if anyone's interested in reading more about it, there is some very interesting research happening about this from other lenses, you know. And again, things, parts or aspects of the frame or the film reel that don't migrate to the digital. One is this leader graphics. Kumar Shahani's film, some very interesting leader graphics happening. Here you've got the, again, density scales, kind of similar to LAD. From the camera negative, you have this sort of flower, this hand holding the leaves, a little rose bud. You see it kind of reoccurring in almost all the Maya Darpan prints, by the way. It's quite a... And here again, very interesting, almost all these leaders had information on the labs that process them. Again, information that doesn't get when you see a restored film or when you see a digitized film. All this material on the leader doesn't often make it to what you see. Again, frames, just looking for this, just looking at the film through, you know, the point of view of frames and not through a viewing machine or the screen being, you know, via a projected film. It's quite a surreal experience. You know, you could compare it to your pre-cinematic zoetrope delights, or you know, landscape, stunning landscape work. So you have this again, the Agfa Gavert stock, which just brings out that this. If you remember, this is the from Bhavantarana, and then you have bamboo flute. Yes, the other one's from bamboo flute, the rock, and again, what Kumar Shahani has written about filming performers. I think he talks about mise en shot. So you have a lot of these. It's just delightful, and you have to remember that it's 1 minute of what you see is equal to more than maybe around 1,440 odd frames. So your sense of time also is kind of, you know, more extended, and especially when you look at filmmakers, at the frames of filmmakers who consciously thought so much about duration in cinema, about time and space, this becomes a kind of an experience that in every way possible, it is very different from watching it on film, you know, watching it as a moving image in that sense. Again, here you have Urmila ji was talking about Ustad Ziaba Mohiuddin Dagarji, who's performing in Khailgata, and here you see the light as you move through the frames. You see the light moving in the most fabulous way. Dancers, back to again the wall, the lights on the markings on the wall in Maya Darpan, the way they are on the frames is just again like landscape art. It's quite incredible. Here you have Taran. Another thing I wanted to say is this also, because the sort of the pot, the urn makes a number of appearances in his films. Maya Darpan, you see it here, and in many ways, while his films are an archive of, you have the bandishes, that the Dagar Gharana, yeah, you have your Kelu Charan Mahapatra's, the repertoire of Odissi pieces, or Alarmal Valli, or the Vision Exchange Workshop footage that is in Maya Darpan. But in many ways, also, it is an archive of experience. For me, this image, if you remember the image from Mati Manas, directed by Mani Kaul and written by Kamal Swarupe, you have, you know, they also evoking myths of Gilgamesh, etc. Here you have all these images, the next two images also that I'm going to show. It's also a kind of an archiving of a very specific experience of a filmmaker who is in Pune at FTI at that particular time. On his west is D.D. Kosambi, on his right he's got Ritvik Ghatak, and you've also got the archive collecting these films, acquiring these films, the Film Society movement. You've got this very reminiscent of Tarkovsky image of Solaris. You've got recently, we had just screened Marguerite Duras' Nathalie Granger. It's just women walking in the afternoon. You know, these are, in many ways, all these experiences also, you get a sense of them being archived in these films, being cross-referred to in films of his contemporaries. I just wanted to say that. And besides that, oh God, I think I missed a slide, but that's okay. These frames, there are also many mysterious frames. You have to remember, these are also knowledge systems that are fast disappearing, if not already disappeared. Lab processing work. The image that I wanted to show was there's this sort of this splash of oceanic blue, where in Maya Darpan, when the scenes are changing. So just imagine, I don't have the slide here somehow, but the transition from the chow dance to that green burst of color, and then there is this odd oceanic blue splash. It could be an error from printing, but these are also strange mysteries that, you know, could be solved. But you also, again, brings us to another aspect of the archive. audiovisual histories, archiving the memories of technicians, the practices of technicians, the practices of analog film, and I'll come back to that in the end. But here you have a censor certificate which said, so the first 2 lines is the recommendations for Maya Darpan. So they delete the front angle view of the nude girl painted in the blue with exposed breast. But Reel 4 now, strangely enough, so this could be referring to the Kali sequence, right? So it has made its way, and I have spoken to my colleagues about what the practice is generally when the restoration happens. It needs to be the censored version of the film that is being restored. So, I mean, a little more work needs to be done on exactly what scene they're referring to here. But it is in Reel 4, the Kali sequence. So they could very well be referring to this. Here you have another very interesting sort of artifact of the analog film, which is your splice sign right on top. So this is the blue I was referring to. I don't know if you can see it really well there. Can you see that right there, the black, and then over here when the green? Between the frames. Yes, between the frames, the blue streak. Yeah. And the other one, again, it's the stalk. This seems to be a very less used stalk, but also you can see it's the same scene. You can see how the colors differ as the stalks differ. That's also a projection cube there. Now this is also very interesting. So this was from the RP of Tarang, the release print of Tarang. It begins before the film starts. It could very well be just a placeholder fragment from another film that has been used here, but there is a character called Munna in the film, in Tarang. Yeah, so then it begins before the film, but you don't find it anywhere in the digital versions of the film, really, if you look at it. And then Char Adhyay, if you look at the digitized versions released, you have this sequence which is missing. So this is also another thing we need to think about when we talk about access, when we talk about the archive's role, in providing access via digitizing, via restoring. You have questions of what is sometimes omitted, what is sometimes omitted willfully, what is sometimes omitted simply because there is also this growing sort of barrier between what a sort of technological understanding of cinema and a more historically, all-embracing understanding of cinema. That is very clear to see now. You can see that sort of mission mode into, where they think that the digital is the final resting place for these objects, and whereas in archives in Europe or in America, where in the 1930s you had a very robust archiving movement happening, there have been several cycles of contemplation around the analog film, several cycles. If one is not what do you call it? It's even now the transition has been studied in very interesting and very important ways. Whereas I believe that in the case of analog film here, it seems like we have taken a leap across the analog film directly into the digital. And access to these films via the digital, yes, it's important. But in the case, while we're discussing Kumar Shahani's films, I think it's also important to think about the analog film too, in terms of also his anxieties about this sort of post-chemical age, as they call it. And the need to also then think about how a space, and especially in today's times when there's so much crisis around what a museum does, what an archive should do, it's very important to also maintain an access to these items, right? That sort of final resting place of the digital is a very scary thing, really. Especially when there was also, when I talk about these various cycles of thought and discourse around film itself, even something like the orphan film, what was really called fiction film or non-fiction film earlier, then it goes through its sort of American theory sort of cycle, and then it we haven't gone through any of that. So I think it's very important to not in a way this is like a grand pastoral to return to the analog, no, not at all, but to understand the sort of not just experiential things you might be missing in terms of you can't experience this color, but also historically important information that you're missing, etc. So another way that the film that we are going to be watching today, Bamboo Flute, Ashish was talking about the length, but also the aspect ratio, really, if you look at it. If you look at the Bamboo Flute, both these films, the picture negatives of which are not there at the archive, and the Australian Cinematheque has preserved both these films, Bhavantarana, Bamboo Flute and Khayal Gata. And these films, they have been released in very butchered ways online. One being the aspect ratio. So you can just imagine the sides of the image being cut to suit the modern viewing experience. So that is something else that needs to be thought about. Yeah, I end with this this frame from Tarang, and there was this short video I wanted to show you actually. So this strange experience of viewing a film through frames. I was also winding them fast, and then this sort of colors, especially with Kumar Shahani's films, the colors, the way they move across is just incredible. And I was talking to Piyusha about it, and so one of the things he was saying was that in early in these labs, one of the ways they would color correct was like that, by winding fast, so that if your eye can catch a slight change in color, you could then send it for color correction. That bit. Just you can see this. Correct. Yeah, sure. So it's a bit. So thank you very much.
Okay, it's after all the excitement of the other talks that have preceded, this is very slow and it's like a pause before the film. It's called watermarking, or it could be marking on water, or the gifts of the archive. You know what watermarking is, so I just want to cut to a comment which researchers showed that approaches developed by Google and other tech giants to watermark their AI images could be beat. And long ago, when I was teaching an MPhil seminar on performance studies, one of the group projects that students took up was on the grey zone. Shops in CP that Prabodh Parikh had first talked to me about, which had immaculate copies of classics.
So these are the kind of areas of navigation, and Aisha's presentation has already brought out that even the sort of the pure and the immaculate is actually not so. And I want to make 3 very quick evocations, maybe 4, all one sentence each. One is a film that Kumar had introduced me to, which is available on YouTube, Toute la mémoire du monde by Alain Kone, 1956, the same cameraman who worked for Bresson, which is about the Bibliothèque Nationale. And then, of course, another favorite and much loved persons of Kumar, Eisenstein and Naum Kleeman, and his experience in Moscow, 2-3 nights of working in an archive which was not quite an archive, but something else that, again, was in some ways opening up the world. And on a personal note, as I was renovating my parents' flat, there's a French architect who has chosen to live in Bengal, married a Bengali woman, and I found out purely by chance that his father used to work for an earlier avatar of Charlie Hebdo, which was not what it is, and died very young. And his mother, who raised 3 kids, worked for about 30 years on the husband's archive. And just like a few months ago, and Laurent showed me the photos, they were taken into the Bibliothèque Nationale. So just to keep that in mind. And in her wonderful book, Laleen's book of collection of island essays, which I've brought with me in case any of you want to actually see the book and maybe get it later, Laleen talks about UNESCO's Memory of the World program to preserve for posterity the audiovisual heritage of mankind, stating that war, social upheaval, and lack of resources have accelerated destruction. Now, from all that we've heard and seen, and especially the last presentation, we know that you don't need to have a war. So technology alone does not preserve. The serendipity of the archive and the larger swirls of history lie waiting to be uncovered by archivists and all who will delve into it. Acts of sustained labor, individual and collaborative, create different archives. So this is one of the points I'm making, that there can be no rules for the archive. You have to work from scratch. And they come in different ways to each of us. So one of the things that one is faced with, that, oh, he made a few films and sadly the rest were never made. So maybe if we turn it a little bit like this and say that the so-called unrealized projects actually make the stuff of life in the archive, along with the films that are there. So this is not to compensate or console or sentimentalize, but perhaps to look at it a little differently. And so I'm going to skip bits to save time. And one of the bits I'm skipping is some of the very strange, not resemblances quite, but interpenetration of thought and work with Hrithik Ghatak's work, which maybe some other time. So what might constitute the archive? Collecting, cataloging, cross-referencing, cross-checking, variations and versions, scanning, copying, safekeeping while it is work in progress, preservation and future homes, homes which are accessible. So one might find a fantastic museum in Austria, film museum, but do we want, so this is something for JNU to think about. And above all, managing the metadata without seeking to control it. This is something I personally have faced over the years that I've been working, that you want to be obsessively doing this metadata stuff, and yet you don't want that to become the archive. So I'm making a simple a suggestion that the archive is to be built with gifts, through serendipity, through long years of collaboration, material artifacts and memory, but possibly not of the kind that alone that the UNESCO manifesto talks about. Kumar's own concern with archiving was articulated at different levels. The inedible memory, as I said, of visiting the Eisenstein archive in Moscow. He never tired of speaking of those magical evenings stretching into late nights where a question might not find a direct response but would lead to him being directed to a possible reference, a resonance that might or might not trigger off an insight. With the completed but yet unreleased Priye Charushile, there was an investigation into the technical details of encryption. So the digital is not, I'm not looking at it as either in sequence or as a competitor. And two of his sort of late public lectures throw an unflinching light on the connection between saving films, saving the future, creating a future for younger and unborn generations. There are images of book burning that have scorched the pages of all that we call history. In a 2019 Satyajit Ray Memorial Lecture, which he read out with slides, called The Future of the Individual, the saving of films through war, the Second World War and occupation. And this essay is going to go into a volume which Brinda has been working on for a while now. The other one, The Future of Cinema, was meant for students at an inaugural lecture in 2022 at OP Jindal University. This is available on YouTube for those of you interested. And then the third instance that I would bring up, the many, where Kumar actually thought of archive not necessarily in the traditional sense, would be in a continuum with research and functioning at an institutional level. This was what later the acronym became SPACE, the proposed Center for Arts, Aesthetics and the Neurosciences in Kerala that he had envisaged in the early years of the 21st century and that he wished to collaborate on with Shashi Kumar and Sadanand Menon. That has its own history. And here, again, two quick references. These are letters that are there. And one of the things that emerges, because while he was a visiting professor and so on, he never actually taught as a tenured person in any of these. So the difference between the need for institutions and the resistance to institutionalization. And there are two very interesting things which, again, obviously I'm not going to have the time to read out, but this, again, is, I think, very central to the, if you like, the muscles and the ligaments of the archive. One was a letter to Advani and Yashpal for FTII. I'm very bad with dates, so any of you who wants to know dates, I have to open my laptop and give you the dates. And the other one was many letters to different film funding, film supporting institutions, which govern the life and death of films and filmmakers, urging them to preserve and disseminate. And one of the, those FUQs that you see when you're desperately looking for something and you're guided to outer space. So one of those, in all the interviews that I've seen or heard or actually listened to, is how do you feel being an extinct breed of state-funded filmmakers? Not posed in this brutal way, but more or less this. So there is a letter with which Roshan may be familiar, to his chartered accountant, I don't know, yes, where he locates himself centrally as a father who wants to nurture the talent and aspiration of his children through diverse educational trajectories. And it is from that perspective that he then speaks of his company, Bombay Cinematograph, and casts himself as an independent filmmaker with the need to travel. It is both a presentation of the self, a description of the efforts needed to keep on making films, and a condensed and personal perspective on the diverse processes, activities, initiatives at a global level that sustain filmmaking and film viewing, the life of cinema. It's not dated, but I would suspect it's the 1990s. And I won't get into the many significations of that name, Bombay Cinematograph. So, the next part is the letter. There's a letter from Paris that was addressed to Manikal, but it's clearly written for the larger public. March 15th, 1968, which Prabha, from Tarang and KK's wife later, brought to Kerala, and it was published in Screen, and she shared it with us. Now, what is very interesting is it's now, after that, it's getting a new lease of life and getting republished, almost like a manifesto. The possibility of a brave new world, but working in the archive, one wants to say, how would one contextualize it in 2024? So it's wonderful the way things get released and take on a life of their own, and yet you also want to ask, well, does it also need to have other questions, other history, interlacing it? So the unrealized projects therefore cannot be a mere list, and also ran to the list of films made, completed and released. The impetus behind them, no matter the theme, the source, for example, Anna Karenina, or Cotton as a civilizational trajectory, which Ashish has published in The Shock of Desire, I am suggesting permeated multiple projects taking on a different life in each case, in films that were made or not made, in projects that were planned or realized. The Cotton Project, for example, returned as a proposed film on Malmal and Muslim, particularly after a visit to Bangladesh in 2019. By this time, Kumar was wary of submitting a full proposal or script to potential producers. So much of this, how am I doing on time? So much of this remains in notes and discussions, in voice recordings, which I would sometimes do clandestinely. In the research already undertaken with overlapping with sometimes some of my ongoing projects, and sometimes only in memory. What we then provisionally call the unrealized is actually may also be seen as continuously morphing, transmuting, and being historicized in different media, moving between the analog and the digital, because again, last three projects in which the very last one was just the beginning. He was thinking of a multimedia installation with Amartya Sen, but the one before that, the Kosambi project, he had worked on for quite a while in Pune. And there was a third one which had a much longer history with Anish Kapoor. And many of these projects would actually be, maybe resurrected is not the correct word, but would come back and become something else. So I just now, to end, I want to just, as it were, extrapolate a couple of, these are not quite themes, not topics, but given all the presentations that we've had today, and I didn't know they were going to be what they were, so it's wonderful that you know what I'm going to say in a way. So the first one is called movement. The object is more than its discrete function or its literal dimensions. So there's a printout of an explicatory email to Ramakant Agnihotri, who's a sociologist and linguist, social linguist. And when we were working on a project on the Constitution, this is 2003-04, Kumar had not yet moved to Delhi, hence there's an email. I don't have the email, I somehow have mysteriously the copy of the email. The project was resurrected again in 2021, but anyway. So this mail is from 2003, when we were in the process of doing the research and fundraising, and we had applied to the European Union because it seemed to fit the bill. And they had a disgustingly complicated form that we had to fill out. So Kumar is describing different budget heads to Ramakant, who has no experience of cinema. his note moves from being descriptive of technical objects, people, and processes to a philosophy of film. I'm going to give just one example. The entire note is in a philosophy of film. So this one is called Equipment, and my note is just a small excerpt. The crane has the maximal movement in all directions as the camera is mounted on a versatile arm, ellipsis. That means there's more stuff, which I'm skipping. Of course, we use it only when it is indicative of articulation in juxtaposition to the most static or the most anarchic, therefore most sparingly. These expository notes must have illuminated and overwhelmed Ramakant at the same time, as he and I struggle to fill in the minutiae of the budget. Okay, the second part is just called Sound, Breath, and Enunciation. Excerpt 1. I'm not going to show you the excerpts, but just to give you a sense. So Charadhyay, long after Charadhyay was made, somebody asked him to write a tribute to Shankho Ghosh, the poet, who Shankho Ghosh and Shivaji had given to the film absolutely wonderful layers, extensive layers of poetry, which had to match with Kobi Robi, so not an easy job. And when Kumar was asked to do this, he in some ways was revisiting Charadhyay. And so then what is highlighted in that tribute to Shankho Ghosh is actually something about voices and readings, and voices in different languages and in different ways, ranging from the professional to the completely homegrown. Excerpt 2 is the return to a soundtrack. This is again another email exchange with Amal Ghode, who was then based in Pune, and Kumar was then in Delhi. And this is about Lata's song in Tarang, where he analyzes, that is Amol, is analyzing the score and the song and sends a musical notation, including details of the string section, the sarangi, the tabla, the vocal lines, using different recordings that are available to him, different takes on that. And a response within a few hours from Kumar, also on email, where he recalls his conversation with Lataji, and I'm just quoting a couple of lines. I had told Lataji that the song is about death as consummation, because Amol notes that there is not only, Urmila should have been here, not only a kampan, but there's also a slight speeding up. And somebody did talk about, I think Urmila did also, about the speeding up. So Kumar writes, so she may have thought of speeding it towards the approach of death. And then he makes a startling, not maybe for those of us who are familiar with his work, but for somebody else, that is for the future delver into the archive, of Amanu's treatment. So he's moving right to another project that he was going to do with Pina Bausch, which would work with Kudiyattam. And this is, of course, Amanu's Valivad, where Amanu's treatment of breathlessness just before the coda. 3 more minutes? Okay. So there is, one finds a program note, right? These are the staples of the archive, especially for performance history, we rely greatly on them. And Laleen has a magnificent essay where she's just taken one program note and gone into the whole history of cinema and theatre in Sri Lanka. So this is a lecture on what I would call enunciation, 27th May 2007 in Bhopal. It's announced as Uchcharan Ki Parampara. I leave it to you to decide. Uchcharan is pronunciation, articulation, enunciation, I don't know. So I have the invitation, we have the invitation card, but we do not have the lecture. This is again normal for the archive. The last thing that I'm going to quote from, again, sound, breath, and enunciation, which also forms the nervous system of bamboo flute. you see it emerge in a partial and early version of the proposal to what he then referred to as the Flute film. So this is again an email which talking about technology, which I'm sending from a friend's computer. I don't yet have an email address. Kumar has one, but those are irretrievable. And I somehow have that printout. Kalidas and Shiva figure, temple and dargah in the north. But then if you look at that Khayal Numa, I think you were there that day when they shot it, in Champaner. This is a abandoned city off Baroda, beautiful. And that sequence is absolutely superb. So he says, proposed film on the flute, just the first 2 lines I'm going to read out. First 3 lines. Divine and natural, the two met together in the simplest and perhaps the most primeval instrument of civilization, the flute. India has as many varieties of the flute as it has languages. And then after a bit, astrophysicists confirm the existence of dense matter and music in space. Now that would have put the person vetting the proposal into a tizzy. Let me end okay, so one might suggest or one might propose that the archive is a repository of possibilities and that disjunctions can well be spaces of dissonances and of germinations of future projects shaped by very different historical forces than what might be preserved in the archive. So it's suggesting that we absolutely cannot imagine the archive. And it is best left to historical forces, but not left to them in the way of not, it has to first give, and then that has to be left open. So it cannot be kind of controlled. So I'll quote from some handwritten notes. I don't yet know which, to my knowledge, they have not been published yet. This is a little piece called Cellular Overtones from Kumar, and Laleen's presentation in a way ties up with some of this. And he says, as virtual space, this is how it begins to take over and control our experience, the human body's rebellion takes on many forms. A little later, art may well go beyond its purely passive, redemptive semiosis to the activation of the sensorium beyond defined praxis, whether technological, social, political, or the dread force of daily habit. So this was a constant refrain. So that new meaning may enter words, gestures, tones, and colors. And if ever the archive reaches the kind of fruition that we would like it to be, maybe we could have this as a kind of epigraph. In new gratuitous play, where the contingent may illuminate the never before and perhaps the never after. This could be one of the many gifts of the archive.
Thank you, Rimli, for that. I think in both presentations, what's come up is this absolute tension between the desire for the archive as an object, a discernible entity that one can control, organize, and so on, and as something, as Rimli said, something that gives, that's open, that the potential of it remaining open historically in a certain sense. I think that tension is very clear, especially at a time when I think many of us are guilty of this also, of wanting to own the archive in various ways of objects and things and so on and so forth. So I think it's a great conversation to have, especially because there are multiple forces around working around creating the absolute object as an archival kind of entity. I think we've had a long, and the film is also longer than we anticipated, so we have the problem. But I think it's completely unfair to not let people speak. So we have about 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe for reflections, thoughts on both the panels in some way. The first panel clearly opened up some of the ways in which Kumar Shahani's work could be reimagined, new questions that could be asked, new ways of thinking about it, new ways of kind of populating its history and practices. And the second clearly is about memorializing, thinking about it, working and so on. So any thoughts? I mean, this is not like a Q&A kind of modality, but people with your thoughts on what we had a very rich afternoon, at least I feel. So 15-20 minutes, anyone?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Please.
Can I read out something that I wanted very much to do?
Sure.
Can I start with
Sure,
that?
sure.
It's by Arun Kopka, who gave this, I've copied this text from a paper he gave at the Kasauli Arts Center seminar held in 1988. And the title was The Case of Sher-Gil Eisenstein. It links up with the last slide I showed of the woman dressed in a sari, walking a tightrope, holding the pole. Arun Kopka says the period in your life from zero to the time you walk, learn to balance, is a period of great struggle. And it took Homo sapiens several millennia to learn to walk, an experience condensed in 3 years. And it is this experience that is recalled in the balancing trapeze acts of the circus. This relationship with balance is articulated in the otherwise plotless spectacle of a circus. The plot of a circus is evolution, because the body is being reminded of the period without the memory knowing it. It's really quite profound, and Kumar has spoken of wanting to be like a child when he makes films.
Thanks for reading that, Laleen. Fantastic lines, actually. So, if there's anything more, a 5-minute break, and then we start the film. Veena, Hariharan will be introducing the film, and yeah. So, thank you everyone.